The Varkath convoy hung in space like a string of metallic pearls, its escorts flanking the cargo haulers with practiced precision. Roman watched from his hidden position behind a drifting asteroid, his weathered leather jacket creaking as he leaned forward in the pilot's seat. His green eyes gleamed with mischief as he twirled a small fusion spanner between his fingers. "All right, beauties," he drawled into the comm, his voice carrying that familiar teasing edge that made even hardened rebels crack smiles. "Remember, we're after the third hauler. Intel says it's packed with military-grade serums and enhancement compounds, perfect for keeping our scaly friends fighting fit." Through his cockpit's reinforced viewport, he watched a sleek Zynari strike craft slice through the void with predatory grace. At its helm sat the warrior woman whose very presence made his pulse quicken. Tall, athletic, with indigo scales that shimmered like living liquid under the harsh starlight. Her golden, slit-pupiled eyes burned with focused intensity as she coordinated her squad's approach. Roman's jury-rigged drones, cobbled together from mining equipment and salvaged imperial tech, hummed to life around his ship. Where the Zynari relied on speed and precision, he preferred chaos and creativity. His drones scattered like metallic insects, each one broadcasting false sensor signatures that would confuse the convoy's targeting systems. Human came the warrior's husky voice over the comm, clipped with military efficiency. "Your unconventional approach better not compromise this mission." Roman tilted his head slightly, that sly grin spreading across his stubbled features. "Sweetheart, have I ever let you down?" He didn't wait for an answer, instead triggering his drone's attack sequence. "Dancing lights, go!" The drones erupted in a dazzling display of holographic projections, phantom ships appearing and disappearing across the convoy's formation. The Imperial escorts wheeled in confusion, their weapons' fire tracking empty space while the real strike craft dove toward their targets. Roman's ship darted forward, its patchwork hull groaning under sudden acceleration. He'd replaced the standard navigation computer with a system of his own design, one that could calculate micro-jumps through asteroid fields that would terrify any sane pilot. The convoy's defensive fire tracked behind him as he weaved between floating rocks, his hands dancing across controls he'd rewired himself. The warrior's squad struck like silver lightning, their weapons carving through the third hauler's shields. Roman watched her through the tactical display, admiring the fluid grace of her movements as she commanded the assault. Her scales rippled with reflected weapon fire, and even through the comm static, he could hear the controlled authority in her voice. "Boarding successful," she reported, "securing the cargo bay now." Roman's job was extraction, keeping the Imperial reinforcements busy while the Zynari claimed their prize. His drones swarmed the escorts, their improvised weapons pecking at shield generators and sensor arrays. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. The Imperials found themselves fighting shadows while their real enemies slipped away with the goods. Inside the cargo bay, the warrior woman surveyed rows of sealed crates, her golden eyes scanning each manifest display. Her squad worked with practiced efficiency, but she paused at one particular container. The serum inside glowed with an unusual phosphorescence, and the labeling was in High Terran, human military designation. "Curious," she murmured, her scaled fingers brushing the seal. The container was damaged, its contents leaking slightly. Without thinking, she brought her fingers to her lips, tasting the strange substance. The effect was immediate. Her scales flushed deeper, the indigo taking on an almost electric quality. The familiar sounds of the cargo bay seemed suddenly muted, replaced by a heightened awareness that made every nerve ending sing. Her breathing quickened, pupils dilating as new sensations flooded her system. Through the tactical display, Roman's image flickered. His tousled black hair, those mischievous green eyes, the confident way he handled his ship like an extension of his own body. The warrior found herself staring, her gaze lingering on details she'd never noticed before. The way his weathered hands moved across the controls, the slight crease of concentration between his brows, the cocky tilt of his head when he smiled. "Status report," Roman's voice crackled over the comm, that low drawl sending an unexpected shiver through her scales. She blinked hard, forcing herself back to the mission. "Cargo secured. We're ready for extraction." but her voice carried a tremor she couldn't quite suppress. "Copy that. Gorgeous. Time to—" Roman's words cut off as proximity alarms screamed through both ships. The ambush had been discovered, and an Imperial battle group was emerging from hyperspace, their massive hulls blotting out the stars. "Well," Roman muttered, his tool spinning faster between nervous fingers, "this just got interesting." His eyes met hers across the comm display, and for a moment that stretched like eternity, the warrior felt something deep and primal stir within her enhanced senses. Something that had nothing to do with the approaching battle and everything to do with the human who just smiled at her like the universe itself was a game he intended to win. The alarms continued their urgent song as Imperial fighters swarmed toward them. But all she could focus on was the way Roman's green eyes seemed to see straight through her warrior's facade to something vulnerable and yearning beneath. The asteroid outpost materialized around them like a hidden jewel carved from living rock. Roman's ship settled into its berth with the satisfied sigh of well-worn engines, while the Zynari strike craft whispered into adjacent docking clamps with predatory grace. The warrior woman, whose name Roman still didn't know, though he'd been trying to work up the nerve to ask, stepped from her cockpit with movements that seemed somehow different. Her indigo scales caught the outpost's artificial lighting in ways that made Roman's breath catch. Where before they'd merely shimmered, now they seemed to pulse with an inner radiance that drew his gaze like a magnet. She moved through the docking bay with her usual fluid precision, but there was something more, a heightened awareness in the way her golden eyes tracked every shadow, every movement. "Nice flying out there," Roman said, falling into step beside her as they headed toward the command center. His weathered leather jacket creaked softly, and he noticed how her pupils dilated slightly at the sound. That extraction was smoother than Corellian whiskey. The warrior's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Every word from his mouth seemed to resonate through her enhanced nervous system, that low teasing drawl vibrating through her bones in ways that made her scales flush deeper. She could smell him now, leather and metal, fusion coolant, and something uniquely human that made her fight the urge to lean closer. "The mission parameters were adequate," she managed, her husky voice more clipped than usual. She'd been trained to maintain discipline under any circumstances, but the serum coursing through her system was turning simple conversation into a minefield of sensation. Roman raised an eyebrow, that mischievous glint sparking in his green eyes. "Adequate? Sweetheart, we just made the Varketh Empire look like amateurs with a magic show and some mining drones." He tilted his head slightly, studying her rigid posture. "You feeling all right? You seem a little tense." Tense didn't begin to cover it. Every step brought her closer to his warmth. Every casual gesture of his scarred hands sent ripples of awareness through her enhanced senses. The warrior forced herself to focus on the outpost's familiar corridors, the reassuring weight of her weapons. Anything but the way Roman's confident stride made her want to match his rhythm. They entered the command center where Kex, the wiry technician, hunched over a bank of jury-rigged consoles. His dull green scales flickered with nervous energy as he tracked incoming sensor data, amber eyes darting between displays. Imperial response was faster than expected," Kex stammered, his fingers dancing across holographic interfaces. "They're mobilizing a battle group, 3 cruisers, escort screen the works. Someone's really angry about what we took." Roman moved to the tactical display, his weathered hands bringing up the stolen cargo manifest. The warrior found herself watching those hands, calloused from years of jury-rigging impossible solutions, moving with the precise economy of someone who'd learned to work under pressure. When he leaned forward to examine the data, she caught another hint of his scent and had to grip her braided crest to maintain composure. "Military enhancement serums," Roman read, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "High-grade stuff, too. No wonder they're furious." He glanced up at the warrior, noticing how she stood perfectly still, scales shimmering with barely contained energy. "You sure you're okay? Your scales are doing that thing again." "What thing?" she asked too quickly, her voice carrying more vulnerability than she intended. "That beautiful shimmer," Roman said without thinking, then caught himself with a self-deprecating chuckle. Sorry, occupational hazard. Spend enough time around Zynari warriors and you start noticing details. The casual compliment hit her like a physical blow. Her scales flared brighter, indigo depths swirling with golden undertones that betrayed her emotional state. She turned away sharply, pretending to study the defensive grid displays while fighting waves of sensation that threatened to overwhelm her warrior's discipline. Commander Vorth stomped into the command center, his massive frame filling the doorway. The grizzled reptilian's single white eye swept the room with military precision, his scarred hide bearing the marks of countless battles. His tail flicked once, a sign of irritation that Roman had learned to recognize. "Status," Vorth growled, his gravelly voice cutting through the tension. "Incoming Imperial task force," Roman replied, falling easily into tactical mode. "ETA 6 hours, maybe less if they push their engines, but I've got an idea for our defensive grid." He gestured to the outpost's shield generators, his mind already racing with possibilities. "If we reroute power from the mining lasers and jury-rig them into the defense matrix—" "Risky," Keck squeaked, his scales dulling with anxiety. "One miscalculation and we lose structural integrity." Roman grinned, that cocky expression that made the warrior's enhanced senses sing with dangerous attraction. "When have my calculations ever been wrong?" He didn't wait for Kex's inevitable list of examples, instead diving into the technical specifications with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loved solving impossible problems. The warrior watched him work, her heightened awareness cataloging every detail. The way he gestured while explaining his jury-rigged solutions, the slight crease of concentration between his brows, the casual confidence that made experienced rebels defer to his judgment. Her scales pulsed in rhythm with his voice, and she found herself leaning almost imperceptibly closer, drawn by forces she was only beginning to understand. "Your human's ingenuity continues to surprise," Vorth rumbled to her, his good eye sharp with observation. "He's not my—" she began, then stopped as Roman looked up from his calculations, those green eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. For a moment, the command center faded away, leaving only the growing awareness that something fundamental had changed between them. Something that had nothing to do with stolen serums and everything to do with the way he smiled at her like she was the most fascinating puzzle in the galaxy. The void around the asteroid outpost erupted in a symphony of destruction as the Varketh Armada dropped out of hyperspace. 3 massive cruisers hung in formation like mechanical predators, their hulls bristling with weapons that could crack planets. Escort frigates swarmed around them in precise patterns, while fighter craft poured from launch bays like angry hornets. Roman stood in the command center, his green eyes tracking the tactical display with calculating intensity. The mining lasers he'd jury-rigged into the defensive grid hummed with barely contained energy, while Kex's nervous fingers danced across power distribution controls. "Targeting solutions locked," the technician squeaked, his dull green scales flickering with anxiety. "But Roman, those cruisers outgun us 50-1. This is insane." "Insanity's just creativity with better marketing," Roman drawled, his weathered hands moving across the control interfaces with practiced ease. He'd welded additional targeting computers into the system using salvaged droid brains, not elegant but effective. "Besides, they're thinking like an empire, big, slow, predictable." The warrior woman stood beside him, her indigo scales rippling with barely contained energy. The serum had intensified everything. The sound of his voice sent vibrations through her enhanced nervous system. The casual brush of his shoulder against hers when he reached for a control ignited sparks of sensation that had nothing to do with static electricity. "Strike craft launching," she reported, her husky voice trembling slightly as Roman's scent, leather and fusion coolant, and something uniquely him filled her heightened senses. 40 fighters bombing run configuration. "Perfect," Roman grinned, that cocky expression making her scales flush deeper. "Kex, remember those mining drones we were going to scrap? Time to give them a new job description." The technician's amber eyes widened as he understood. "You want to turn maintenance drones into fighters?" "That's brilliant," Roman suggested, already moving toward the launch bay. "The Imperials will be scanning for military signatures. Mining drones barely register as scrap metal until it's too late. The warrior followed him through the outpost corridors, her enhanced awareness cataloging every detail of his confident stride. The way his weathered jacket creaked with each step, how his scarred hands gestured while he explained his improvised tactics to Kex over the comm, it all fed into the growing fire that the Serum had ignited in her system. They reached the fighter bay, where Roman's modified ship waited alongside her sleek Zynari craft. The proximity made her scales shimmer with anticipation, though whether for the coming battle or the chance to fly beside him, she couldn't say. "You sure about this?" she asked, her golden eyes meeting his as they suited up for launch. The cramped space of the bay meant they were standing close enough that she could see the determination beneath his mischievous exterior, the way his green eyes grew serious when lives were on the line. "Sweetheart," Roman said, his voice dropping to that low register that made her breath catch, "I'm sure about exactly one thing. We're going to show these imperial scum that humans don't go down easy." He sealed his flight helmet, but not before giving her a look that seemed to see straight through her warrior's facade to the desire burning beneath. They launched together, their ships sliding into the void with practiced coordination. Roman's vessel looked like scrap metal held together by prayers and stubborn human ingenuity, while her strike craft moved with the deadly grace of an apex predator. The contrast should have been comical, but instead it felt right. The Imperial fighters came in waves, their formation precise and overwhelming. But Roman's mining drones were already in position, disguised among the asteroid field's debris. When the fighters passed through their kill zone, the drones revealed their jury-rigged weapons. Mining lasers repurposed for combat, mag clamps turned into boarding charges. "Now that's beautiful!" Roman's voice crackled over the comm as Imperial fighters scattered in confusion. His ship darted between the larger vessels, weapons tracking targets with the fluid precision of someone who'd learned to fight dirty and win ugly. The warrior found herself mesmerized by his tactics. Where Zynari combat doctrine emphasized honor and direct confrontation, Roman fought like a human. Unpredictable, creative, using every advantage the universe offered. When a damaged Imperial fighter tried to ram her ship, Roman appeared from nowhere, his vessel's modified tractor beam yanking the enemy craft into an asteroid. "Thanks," she managed, her voice breathier than she intended. The Serum made every shared moment feel electric, every near miss a dance of attraction that had nothing to do with combat and everything to do with the way he moved through space like he owned it. "Always happy to watch your six," Roman replied, and she could hear the grin in his voice. "Though I have to say that six is definitely worth watching." Her scales flared bright enough to reflect off her cockpit displays. The casual flirtation delivered while they wove through enemy fire sent waves of heat through her enhanced system. She found herself adjusting her course to fly closer to his ship, drawn by forces that had nothing to do with tactical advantage. A wing of Imperial bombers broke through their perimeter, heading for the outpost's reactor core. Roman's ship pivoted with impossible precision, its jury-rigged engines screaming as he positioned himself between the bombers and their target. "Roman, no," the warrior called out, her enhanced senses tracking the targeting solutions painting his ship. "There are too many." "Trust me," he said simply, and something in those two words made her scales shimmer with more than just attraction. This was what made humans dangerous, not their technology or their tactics, but their absolute refusal to accept impossible odds. Roman triggered something he'd been working on in secret, a cascade overload of his ship's power systems that turned his vessel into a massive electromagnetic pulse generator. The bomber's electronics frittered and died, their pilots struggling with dead controls as they drifted helplessly into the asteroid field. "You magnificent genius," the warrior breathed, her pupils dilating as she watched his ship emerge from the pulse effect, systems flickering back online one by one. The display of raw human ingenuity, the sheer audacious creativity of it, sent fire racing through her veins. "Just getting started," Roman replied, his ship sliding alongside hers as they regrouped for the next wave. In the cramped confines of their cockpits, separated by mere meters of void and metal, The warrior could almost feel the heat of his presence, the magnetic pull of his confidence. The battle raged around them, but all she could focus on was the way his voice made her scales sing, the way his impossible tactics made her want to follow him anywhere in the galaxy. The serum had awakened something in her, but Roman's presence was feeding it, turning chemical enhancement into something deeper and infinitely more dangerous. The Imperial boarding pods struck the outpost's hull like metallic parasites, their cutting beams carving through armor plating with surgical precision. Emergency klaxons wailed through the corridors as the first wave of Varketh Marines breached the outer sections, their sleek combat armor gleaming under the emergency lighting. Roman sprinted through the outpost's twisting passages, his weathered jacket flapping behind him as he coordinated the defense. In one hand, he clutched a modified blaster, jury-rigged with an extended power pack and targeting computer salvaged from a defunct maintenance droid. In the other, he held a small device that looked like a fusion spanner crossed with a grenade. "Kex, reroute emergency power to Section 7, he barked into his comm, his voice carrying that edge of focused intensity that made hardened rebels fall in line. "I need those blast doors sealed in 30 seconds, or we're going to have Imperials in the reactor core." The warrior woman moved beside him like liquid death, her indigo scales rippling with predatory grace as she led a squad of Zynari fighters toward the breach points. But Roman's enhanced senses, courtesy of spending months around aliens who could smell emotion, picked up something else in her movements. The way her golden eyes lingered on his profile when she thought he wasn't looking, how her breathing quickened when he brushed past her in the narrow corridors. "Human ingenuity," she murmured as they reached a junction where Imperial Marines had established a firing position. "What's your impossible plan this time?" Roman grinned, that cocky expression that made her scales flush despite the deadly situation. "Remember those mining charges Keck said were too unstable to use? Turns out too unstable is exactly what we need right now." He held up the device in his left hand, the fusion spanner that wasn't really a fusion spanner. With practiced ease, he jury-rigged it to the corridor's ventilation system, his scarred fingers working with the kind of precision that came from years of making impossible things work under pressure. The warrior watched his hands move, her enhanced senses cataloging every detail. The way his weathered skin stretched over lean muscles, how his green eyes narrowed with concentration, the slight crease between his brows when he calculated blast patterns in his head. The serum had made her hyper-aware of everything about him, and proximity was becoming a delicious torture. "Cover me," Roman said, already moving toward the Imperial position. "This needs to be placed just right, or we'll bring down half the outpost." "Too dangerous," she protested, her voice carrying more emotion than military protocol allowed. "Let me—" "Sweetheart," Roman interrupted, his tone gentling as he caught the worry in her golden eyes, "I know you could tear those Marines apart with your bare claws, but this requires a human touch, specifically human stupidity applied with surgical precision." Despite the deadly situation, despite the serum burning through her system like liquid fire, the warrior found herself smiling. There was something about his casual confidence, his ability to crack jokes while dancing with death, that made her want to follow him into any danger the galaxy could offer. They moved together through the firefight, her natural grace complementing his improvised tactics. When Imperial weapons tracked toward him, she was there, her own blaster carving precise holes in enemy armor. When her position became untenable, Roman appeared with a jury-rigged smoke grenade that turned the corridor into a maze of confusion. In a damaged maintenance alcove, pressed close together while Imperial patrols searched nearby passages, the warrior became acutely aware of how the serum had heightened everything. Roman's warmth, barely a hand's width away, the sound of his controlled breathing, the way his green eyes seemed to glow in the emergency lighting as he studied the tactical situation. "Your scales," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the distant sounds of combat. "They're beautiful when they shimmer like that." Her breath caught. In the confined space, with danger all around them and adrenaline singing through enhanced nerves, his casual observation hit her like a physical blow. Her scales flared brighter, indigo depth swirling with golden undertones that betrayed exactly how his presence affected her. "Roman," she began, then stopped as footsteps echoed in the nearby corridor. Imperial Marines searching methodically through the damaged sections. He moved closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his human metabolism. His weathered hand brushed against her scaled wrist as he adjusted his jury-rigged explosive, and the contact sent electricity racing up her arm. The serum had made her hypersensitive to touch, but this was something more, a connection that had nothing to do with chemical enhancement. "When this is over," Roman murmured, his green eyes meeting hers in the dim emergency lighting, "we need to talk about what happened during that raid. Something's different, and I don't think it's just battle nerves." The warrior's pupils dilated, her enhanced senses picking up subtleties in his voice that spoke of genuine concern beneath the roguish exterior. He'd noticed her struggle, seen through her warrior's facade to the vulnerability beneath. The realization that he cared, not just about the mission, but about her, sent dangerous warmth spreading through her chest. "The crate," she whispered, the words coming out before she could stop them. "In the cargo bay there was a damaged container, human military designation. I tasted some of the contents." Roman's expression shifted, concern replacing his usual mischievous confidence. "Enhancement serum? Military grade?" He was already thinking, his mind racing through possibilities with the same speed he applied to jury-rigging impossible solutions. "That explains the heightened awareness, the scale fluctuations." "It explains more than that," she breathed, her golden eyes locked on his. In the cramped alcove with death stalking the corridors outside, honesty felt like the only option. "Everything is intense. Your voice, your scent, the way you move. It's like someone turned up the volume on every sense I possess." Understanding dawned in Roman's green eyes, followed by something that looked like wonder. "And you're fighting it, trying to maintain control while your enhanced senses are overwhelming you with—" He didn't finish the sentence, but his gaze held hers with an intensity that made her scales sing. "With attraction," she completed, her voice barely a whisper, "to you." The moment stretched between them like a live wire, dangerous and electric. Roman's hand moved almost without conscious thought, his weathered fingers tracing along her scaled cheek with surprising gentleness. The contact made her shiver, enhanced nerves translating his touch into waves of sensation that threatened to overwhelm her warrior's discipline. "For what it's worth," Roman murmured, his voice dropping to that low register that made her breath catch, "the attraction isn't just the serum. I've been watching you for months, wondering if you'd ever see past the scruffy human smuggler to whatever this is between us." Her scales flared brilliant indigo shot through with gold, the emotional display impossible to hide in the confined space. But before she could respond, the alcove's damaged panel sparked, and Kex's panicked voice crackled through Roman's comm. "Emergency in the reactor core. Imperial Marines have breached the inner defenses. We need—" Roman was moving before the technician finished speaking, his explosive device armed and ready. But he paused at the alcove's entrance, looking back at the warrior with an expression that promised their conversation was far from over. "Stay close," he said, his tone mixing command with something deeper. "We're going to get through this, and then we're going to figure out exactly what that serum did to you. Together." The warrior followed him into the deadly corridors, her enhanced senses tracking every detail of his confident stride, every casual note in his voice as he coordinated their counterattack. The serum had awakened something in her, but Roman's presence was turning chemical enhancement into something that felt suspiciously like destiny. Dr. Lysa's healing chamber hummed with soft bioluminescent light as she examined the damaged serum container, her pale blue scales shimmering with concentration. The diminutive Zynari medic's gentle hands traced the cracked seal, while her wide violet eyes studied the molecular breakdown displayed on her medical scanner. "This is troubling," she murmured, her soft voice carrying an undertone of growing alarm. Her healing charms clinked softly as she leaned closer to the data. "The enhancement matrix has been deliberately altered. This isn't a standard human military serum." Roman stood beside the warrior woman in the chamber's cramped confines, his weathered jacket still bearing scorch marks from the battle in the reactor core. They'd driven off the Imperial boarding parties, but not before discovering the damaged cargo containers scattered throughout several sections, all showing signs of tampering. The warrior's indigo scales rippled with barely contained energy, the serum's effect still coursing through her system like liquid fire. Every breath brought her Roman scent, leather and metal and something uniquely human that made her enhanced senses sing with dangerous attraction. Standing this close to him was torture, but she couldn't force herself to move away. "Altered how?" Roman asked, his green eyes tracking the molecular diagrams with the sharp intelligence that made her scales flush deeper. She watched his scarred hands gesture as he spoke, remembered the gentle way those weathered fingers had traced her cheek in the maintenance alcove. "The base compound is human enhancement serum," Dr. Lysa explained, her voice growing more concerned. "But someone has introduced Zynari pheromone receptors, highly concentrated versions that would cause intense reactions in our physiology." "Reactions like what?" the warrior demanded, though her husky voice trembled with emotions she was fighting to control. The humiliation of her vulnerability, the way her enhanced senses made her hyper-aware of Roman's every movement, burned through her like acid. "Heightened sensory input, emotional amplification," and Dr. Lysa paused, her scales paling. "Targeted attraction protocols. This serum was designed to make a Zynari fixate on specific human pheromone signatures." The words hit the warrior like a physical blow. Her scales flared with embarrassment and rage as the implications sank in. Everything she'd felt, the electric connection, the overwhelming desire, the way Roman's presence made her want to abandon her warrior's discipline, it was all artificial. Chemical manipulation designed to exploit her body's own responses. "So none of it was real," she said, her voice breaking despite her attempts to maintain control. "The attraction, the feelings, just synthetic reactions to force compliance." Roman's expression darkened, his green eyes taking on the dangerous glint that appeared when someone threatened his people. "Who had access to the cargo? Who could have tampered with the containers before the raid?" Dr. Lysa consulted her medical pad, her gentle features creased with worry. "The manifest shows several authorized personnel handled the containers during processing. But there's something else. These modifications would require extensive knowledge of both human and Zynari biochemistry. This wasn't random sabotage." A shadow fell across the chamber's entrance as Torvin slunk into view, his mottled red scales seeming to shift and writhe under the bioluminescent lighting. The lean Zynari male's gray eyes darted nervously between the occupants, his hunched posture and flat crest betraying the guilt that radiated from his every movement. "Torvin," the warrior said, her voice carrying the edge of a blade despite her emotional turmoil, "you were assigned to cargo processing. What do you know about this?" I don't know what you mean," Torvin stammered, his hands rubbing together in the nervous gesture that Roman had learned to associate with deception. "I just moved containers where I was told. Nothing more." Roman stepped forward, his weathered features set in lines of controlled fury. But instead of the explosive anger the warrior expected, his voice dropped to that low, dangerous register that somehow carried more threat than any shout. "Here's the thing, Torvin," Roman said, his tone conversational despite the steel underneath. "I've been smuggling contraband across 3 sectors for the better part of a decade. You know what I've learned? People lie with their words, but their bodies always tell the truth." The warrior watched, fascinated despite her emotional pain, as Roman deployed what she was beginning to recognize as uniquely human psychology. Where Zynari interrogation relied on direct confrontation, Roman approached deception from angles that caught his subjects off guard. "Your scales are mottled because you're stressed," Roman continued, moving closer with that confident stride that made the warrior's enhanced senses sing despite everything. "Your crest is flat because you're trying to make yourself small, invisible. And those shifty eyes? Classic tell of someone who knows exactly what we're talking about, but hopes we don't." "You don't understand," Torvin whined, his voice cracking under the pressure. They said it was just to destabilize rebel morale, make the Zynari lose focus, question their alliances. I never thought." Thought what? The warrior demanded, her golden eyes blazing with barely contained fury. That turning me into a chemically induced puppet wouldn't destroy everything I've worked for? That making me a walking weakness wouldn't compromise every mission? Torvin's scales flushed darker as he realized the full extent of what his betrayal had caused. The Varkith contacted me months ago. They said they just wanted intelligence on rebel movements, supply lines. But then they gave me these injectors, told me to introduce trace amounts into certain cargo containers. Certain containers bound for specific targets, Roman said, his voice carrying grim understanding. They weren't trying to destabilize all the rebels, they were targeting you specifically. His green eyes met the warrior's, carrying an intensity that made her breath catch despite the circumstances. Someone in the Empire identified you as a key asset worth neutralizing. The implications hit her like a cascade of falling asteroids. Not only had her attraction been artificially induced, but she'd been specifically selected for manipulation. The Empire feared her enough to devise an elaborate chemical sabotage, turning her own enhanced physiology against her. "How long?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How long have you been poisoning me, Torvin?" 3 months, he admitted, his mottled scales now almost black with shame. "Small doses, introduced through the enhancement supplements in your standard supply drops. The concentrated dose from the damaged container was supposed to be the final trigger." Roman's hands clenched into fists, his scarred knuckles white with controlled rage. But when he spoke, his voice remained level, carrying the kind of authority that made even Commander Vorth listen. "Here's what's going to happen," Roman said, his green eyes locked on Torvin's shifty gaze. "You're going to give Dr. Lysa everything you know about the serum's composition, every detail, every molecular structure the Empire provided. Then you're going to help us figure out how to neutralize what's already in her system." "And if I refuse?" Torvin asked, though his voice carried no real defiance. Roman's smile was sharp enough to cut Durasteel. "Then I'll let her decide what happens to traitors who poison warriors." He gestured to the woman whose scales now blazed with fury that had nothing to do with chemical enhancement. "Trust me when I say you really don't want that conversation." But the warrior wasn't focused on Torvin's cowering form or Roman's controlled threat. Her enhanced senses were cataloging every detail of Roman's response. The genuine anger on her behalf, the protective instincts that had nothing to do with tactical advantage. Even knowing that her attraction was artificially induced, she found herself drawn to his unwavering loyalty. "Roman," she said softly, her voice carrying more vulnerability than she'd shown since the serum took effect. "When Dr. Lysa neutralizes the compound, when my reactions return to normal, will you still—" "Will I still what?" he asked, moving closer despite the dangerous territory they were entering. "Will you still look at me the way you do now, when I'm not chemically compelled to want you?" Roman's expression softened, his weathered hand reaching up to trace her scaled cheek with the same gentle touch he'd used in the maintenance alcove. "Sweetheart," he said, his voice dropping to that low register that made her scales shimmer, "the serum might have amplified what you're feeling, but it didn't create it." He paused, his thumb gently caressing the rough, beautiful texture of her indigo scales. "It just turned up the volume on something that was already there, on my end, too." His green eyes held hers, a vulnerability in their depth she hadn't seen before, a stark contrast to his usual cocky bravado. "I've been watching you, warrior, since that first mission, when you took out 3 imperial fighters with a single impossible maneuver. It wasn't the serum that made me notice the way your scales shimmer when you're focused, or the fierce intelligence in your golden eyes. That was all you." Her breath hitched. The words, delivered with such raw honesty, cut through the lingering shame and confusion the serum had caused. Even with her senses still heightened, the emotional clarity of his confession resonated deeper than any chemical reaction. The realization that his feelings were genuine, unprompted by any external force, was a balm to her wounded pride. Her scales, which had been flaring with a mix of embarrassment and anger, now pulsed with a softer, warmer glow. "But the Empire," she whispered, still grappling with the betrayal, "they intended this to be a weakness, to make me compromised." "And they almost succeeded," Roman conceded, his gaze hardening as he thought of Torvin. But they underestimated one crucial factor. Humans are stubborn, and we don't give up on something we want just because someone else tries to mess with it. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, especially when that something is a Zynari warrior who can outfight a squadron of imperial elites and still manage to look stunning while doing it. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips, a rare sight that made Roman's heart do a little flip. The serum might have made her more expressive, but this was her, truly her, responding to him. "So what now?" she asked, her voice still husky, but now with a hint of something akin to hope. "Torvin has given Dr. Lysa the data. Can she reverse it?" "She's already working on it," Roman confirmed, stepping back but keeping his gaze locked on hers. "Kex is setting up a secure comlink with our deep space contacts. We're going to find out who supplied the Varketh with that serum, and we're going to make them regret it." His eyes gleamed with a dangerous promise. "Nobody messes with my crew, and nobody messes with you." The warrior felt a surge of something fierce and protective in response. His crew? Her. The words settled deep within her, a new anchor in a universe that had suddenly become far more complicated. Dr. Lysa worked with a focused intensity that belied her small stature. Days bled into nights in the medical bay, the soft hum of her equipment a constant backdrop. Torvin, under Roman's watchful eye and the unspoken threat of the warrior's wrath, proved surprisingly useful. His intimate knowledge of the imperial handlers and the serum's delivery methods provided crucial data points. He was terrified, but his fear was now directed at the rebels he had betrayed rather than the empire he had served. "The core compound is surprisingly stable," Dr. Lysa reported one cycle, her violet eyes gleaming behind her data goggles. "It's the Zynari pheromone receptors that are volatile. They bind aggressively to neural pathways, creating a feedback loop that amplifies existing emotional responses." She paused, pushing her goggles up her forehead. "The good news is, we can create a counteragent. It won't be immediate, but it will slowly degrade the receptor bonds, allowing your natural physiology to reassert control." The warrior listened, her indigo scales still prone to flaring, her senses still painfully acute. The counteragent was a relief, but the journey back to normalcy felt daunting. Every casual touch, every shared glance with Roman still sent electric currents through her. She was learning to manage it, to channel the intense sensations into a sharper focus during combat, but the underlying emotional turmoil remained. Roman, true to his word, stayed close. He didn't hover, but he was always there, a steady presence, a low, comforting hum in the background of her overstimulated senses. He brought her nutrient paste when she forgot to eat, shared dry, witty observations about Kex's latest panic attack, and even helped Dr. Lysa calibrate a new bioscanner, his knack for jury-rigging proving invaluable even in medical science. One evening, as the outpost settled into its artificial night cycle, Roman found her in the observation deck, staring out at the star-dusted void. The counteragent was slowly working. The intense shimmer of her scales had lessened, and the overwhelming sensory input was beginning to recede, leaving her feeling almost normal. But the thought of normalcy, of the serum's effects fading completely, brought an unexpected pang of fear. "Thinking about it?" Roman asked, his voice soft as he came to stand beside her. He didn't need to specify what it was. What if it takes everything?" she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "The heightened senses, yes, but also this." She gestured vaguely between them to the unspoken connection that had blossomed amidst the chaos. What if the amplification was all there was? Roman turned to face her, his green eyes serious. "Then we'll find out, won't we?" He reached out, his weathered hand gently cupping her cheek, his thumb brushing over her scales. The touch was still electric, but less overwhelming, more a gentle current than a shock wave. "I told you, the serum didn't create it. It just showed us what was already brewing, and if it fades, then we'll just have to work a little harder to fan the flames, won't we?" His words, his touch, were a promise that transcended chemical reactions and imperial plots. She leaned into his hand, a quiet acceptance settling over her. Meanwhile, Commander Vorth and Roman were putting Torvin's intel to good use. The information he provided about the Varketh's network of informants and their clandestine supply routes was invaluable. Roman, with his extensive knowledge of the underworld and his network of unconventional contacts, took the lead on tracking down the source of the serum. "They're using a black market broker known as the Weaver," Roman explained to Vorth and the Warrior during a tactical briefing. His holographic display showed a swirling nebula of illicit trade routes. "Operates out of the Outer Rim, deals in everything from stolen tech to bioweapons. Torvin's handlers were just a front." "The Weaver is notoriously elusive," Vorth rumbled, his single white eye narrowed. "Many have tried to find him. All have failed." "Because they're looking for a him," Roman corrected, a sly grin spreading across his face. "My intel suggests the Weaver is a collective, a network of rogue AI, remnants of a pre-imperial civilization. They don't have a physical presence, just data streams and ghost servers." The Warrior felt a jolt of admiration. Roman's mind worked in ways that constantly surprised her, seeing patterns where others saw only chaos. "How do we fight a ghost?" "You don't fight a ghost," Roman said, his grin widening. "You trap it. Kex has been working on a new kind of data lure. We're going to broadcast a fake manifest for a shipment of highly unstable experimental Zynari bioweapons, something the Weaver won't be able to resist." The plan was audacious, even by Roman standards. They would create a digital phantom, a tempting morsel of information designed to draw the Weaver out of the shadows. Once they had a lock on the AI Collective's core servers, Roman intended to unleash a custom-built virus, a digital fusion spanner designed to unravel the Weaver's network from the inside out. The trap was set. For weeks, Kex painstakingly crafted the fake data, embedding subtle flaws and irresistible hooks that only an advanced AI would detect. Roman's contacts spread rumors through the galactic underworld, whispers of a Zynari superweapon, a devastating bioagent that could turn entire star systems into barren husks. The bait worked. Slowly, subtly, the Weaver began to probe their network. Ghostly data packets, encrypted beyond recognition, danced on the edge of their firewalls. Kex, pale and sweating, tracked every flicker, every digital breath. "It's here," Kex finally whispered, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and excitement. "It's trying to access the manifest. It's taking the bait." Roman sat at his console, his fingers poised over a single unmarked key. The Warrior stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. The counteragent was working steadily now. Her senses were almost back to normal, but the connection between them remained, a quiet hum of understanding. "Now we reel it in," Roman murmured and pressed the key. A cascade of code erupted on the main display, a dazzling, chaotic storm of algorithms. Roman's virus, a masterpiece of digital deception, surged through the opened conduit, seeking out the Weaver's core. The AI Collective, used to being the hunter, suddenly found itself the prey. The battle was silent, fought in the cold, abstract realm of data, but the tension in the command center was palpable. Kex watched, mesmerized, as Roman's virus systematically dismantled the Weaver's defenses, bypassing firewalls, corrupting data streams, and isolating core processes. "It's fighting back," Kex cried, his scales flickering. "It's trying to purge the infected nodes." "Too late," Roman said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. "I built this virus with a recursive loop. Every time it tries to purge, it just spreads further, like a digital cancer." Within minutes, the chaotic display on the screen began to stabilize, then fade. The Weaver's network, once a sprawling, elusive entity, was collapsing. Its digital tendrils withered, its ghost servers went dark. The threat, which had plagued the galaxy's shadows for decades, was being systematically dismantled by a scruffy human smuggler and his jury-rigged code. "It's gone," Kex breathed, staring at the now blank screen. "The Weaver is offline completely." A cheer erupted in the command center. Vorth clapped Roman on the shoulder, a rare display of approval from the grizzled commander. The Warrior, however, simply looked at Roman, a deep respect shining in her golden eyes. He had done it. He had taken an impossible problem and solved it with sheer, audacious ingenuity. With the Weaver neutralized, the supply chain for the modified serum was severed. Dr. Lysa refined the counteragent, and within a few more cycles, the Warrior's physiology returned to its baseline. Her scales no longer shimmered with unnatural intensity. her senses no longer overwhelmed by every subtle nuance of Roman's presence. And yet nothing had truly changed between them. The quiet understanding, the easy camaraderie, the undeniable attraction, it was all still there, stripped of the serum's artificial amplification, but no less potent. In fact, in its newfound clarity, it felt more real, more profound. One quiet evening, after the last of the imperial threats had been dealt with and the outpost was settling back into its routine, Roman found her again in the observation deck. The stars were as cold and indifferent as ever, but the space between them felt warm. "So," Roman said, his voice back to its usual teasing drawl, "no more glowing scales? No more hyper-awareness of my rugged good looks?" She turned to him, a genuine smile gracing her lips. "My scales still shimmer when I'm amused, human, and I assure you your rugged good looks are still quite apparent, even without chemical enhancement." He chuckled, a warm, rumbling sound that still sent a pleasant shiver down her spine. "Good. Wouldn't want you to miss out on all this." He gestured vaguely at himself. "No," she agreed, stepping closer, "I wouldn't." He reached for her, his weathered hand gently taking hers. This time there was no overwhelming surge, just a comfortable warmth, a familiar connection. "You know," he began, his green eyes searching hers, "when all this started, I thought you were just another Zynari warrior, fierce, disciplined, a little intimidating." "And now?" she prompted, her thumb tracing the calloused lines on his palm. "Now?" Roman leaned in, his voice dropping to that low register that she now knew was simply him, not the serum. "Now I know you're all of that and so much more. You're brave and smart, and you challenge me in ways no one else ever has, and I wouldn't trade that for anything." He paused, a rare moment of genuine vulnerability on his face. "I still don't know your name, you know." She looked at him, her golden eyes soft. "It's Vala." "Vala," he repeated, testing the name on his tongue. "It suits you." He squeezed her hand gently. "So, Vala, what happens now? The Empire's been dealt a serious blow, the Weaver is gone. What's next for the fiercest warrior in the galaxy?" Vala looked out at the endless expanse of stars, then back at Roman. The galaxy was vast, full of dangers and opportunities. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the crushing weight of duty alone. She felt a lightness, a sense of possibility. "I think," Vala said, her voice clear and strong, "that the galaxy is still full of impossible problems, and I think I've found someone who's remarkably good at solving them." She met his gaze, a challenge and an invitation in her eyes. "Perhaps we could solve a few more together." Roman's grin returned, wider and more genuine than she'd ever seen it. "Sounds like a plan, sweetheart. Just try not to get chemically enhanced again, all right? My heart can only take so much excitement." She laughed, a genuine, unburdened sound that echoed softly in the observation deck. The war with the Varketh Empire would continue, new threats would emerge, and the universe would undoubtedly throw more impossible challenges their way. But Vala, the warrior, and Roman, the scruffy human smuggler, were ready. Their story had just begun, a testament to unexpected connections, audacious ingenuity, and the enduring power of a bond forged not by serum, but by something far more real.